Get Rich Education is brought to you by Norada Real Estate and Highlands Residential Mortgage.
Welcome to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, giving you information and ideas on the investment that has turned more ordinary people into millionaires and billionaires than anything else, and can provide you with more wealth and happiness than you ever thought possible. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, and educator, Keith Weinhold.
Hey, welcome to Get Rich Education, episode 140. Hi, I'm Keith Weinhold, and thanks for making us your investing show of choice across 182 world nations. Today, we're talking about investing in single-family income properties and how single-family has advantages that really no other asset type does. Now, we have one of the largest and most high-profile multifamily apartment building investors anywhere, Ken McElroy, come on the show with us here regularly. And the last time Ken was here with us 2 months ago, here's what Ken said about investing in multifamily apartment buildings today.
In my opinion, it's a terrible time to buy multifamily in most metros. But being that said, there's a huge glut for single-family homes. As you know, there's a lot of people in rentals that want to be in single-family.
So Ken thinks it's a terrible time to buy multifamily and that there's a glut of pent-up tenant demand to rent single-family homes. Now, the most salient reason that some smart money has shifted away from multifamily apartment buildings is, and it's no secret, that there's just still this ongoing suppression in cap rates, meaning that investors are jumping in and paying more money for an apartment building in proportion to an ever lesser income. Sometimes that's counterintuitive to people, but as apartment building prices are driven up, cap rates go down because a cap rate is NOI, net operating income, divided by purchase price. Last week, I released my first ever book, 7 Money Myths That Are Killing Your Wealth Potential, and a million thanks to you for making that an Amazon #1 best-selling ebook in multiple categories. This week, I'm pleased to tell you that the paperback version of the book is out. Yes, I'm holding one in my hand right now, and I'm really pleased that I was able to keep the book brief. As I worked on the book over the months, I found ways to kind of chop it down and make it more dense. You know, I like doing some reading, but the problem with most books is they're just too doggone long. So the Kindle edition is about 40 pages, and the paperback here with its smaller pages is 80 pages. Getting your money to work for you creates wealth? No, it does not. Getting your money to work for you does not create wealth. I dispel that and 6 other money myths in the book. You can grab the book at getricheducation.com/book. That's where you can find the paperback and the e-version, again, at getricheducation.com/book. Here on the show, we've had a lot of new listeners lately. I've been here every week since 2014, squarely with the singular mission to help you build your wealth, especially through real estate investing. After this week's show here on single-family income property, in future weeks, we've got a discussion about real estate investing hedonics and also a show about the nuts and bolts of 1031 tax-deferred exchanges. So 2 more kind of advanced topics there, or maybe really intermediate-ish. Let's talk about single-family income property investing. Today's guest is someone you're probably already familiar with because he's a regular contributor here at GRE. When it comes to who has the most all-around real estate investing knowledge, it's hard to think of anyone's name before our guest today. From residential real estate to commercial to creative financing and seller finance structures, from single-family homes to apartments on the equity side, and really being the go-to resource for helping you get in on the debt side with mortgage note investing. Today's the return of the mastermind behind his company, Hassle-Free Cash Flow Investing. Give a big welcome back to David Campbell.
Keith, I'm so excited to be here today, and thank you so much for your generosity and inviting me to continue to coming back and having a good time with your listeners.
You are most recurrent guest, tied with Tom Wheelwright for 6 appearances, so it's great to have you here. It feels a little bit like old home week again. David, you have a lot of experience with investing in single-family homes and single-family turnkeys, and there are just so many advantages to that asset type that no one else offers when you're a direct investor in single-family income properties. Tell us about some of those advantages.
Single family homes is a very simple business model to understand. And when I'm helping people understand how to create passive income, the simpler you can make the process, the more likely that they are to succeed. And renting out a single family home is probably one of the simplest forms of direct real estate ownership. You're acquiring a dwelling and somebody pays you for the privilege of living in that dwelling, and you provide them clean, safe, affordable housing. And in exchange for that benefit, they're going to pay you a monthly rent, which is used to pay a mortgage. And so you're getting hopefully income above and beyond that mortgage expense and the operating expenses. And that excess income is cash flow. So monthly cash flow is important. Amortization on your mortgage is really important. The IRS code is set up to reward investors in single family homes with a very favorable rate of depreciation, which is a form of phantom loss. It's a way for the IRS to stimulate investment into single family home rentals by giving you an even more favorable rate of depreciation than other forms of commercial real estate. That depreciation results into a benefit. Also, like that single family homes tend to trade independently market cap rates. So when you're invested in commercial real estate that's income producing, then the value of that commercial real estate is usually directly tied to the net operating income and the market expectation for yield. Another way we could say that is cap rate. And so single family homes don't really trade on a cap rate the way the commercial real estate does, because owner occupants, they are looking at a lot of different variables when choosing single family homes as a purchase. So you could see a price of a home appreciate far greater than its income would warrant. And so that appreciation is another really strong benefit. Another benefit that I like to talk about with single family home investing is inflation protection, or the ability to buy an income stream that's indexed against just the general cost of living in society. So as the price of milk goes up and the price of gasoline goes up and the price of widgets that you buy go up, housing generally follows that trend. And so your income and property expenses generally go up except for the mortgage. And so you can create a wedge or a delta between your income and expenses. So as all of your income goes up with inflation and your operating expenses go up with inflation, but your mortgage stays flat, that does increase your cash flow in the future.
That's right. So being a direct investor in single-family income property, that gives an investor the full measure of the 5 profit centers that direct real estate investors realize. And the more pooled that an investment is, the more those 5 profit centers get diluted, or some of those 5 just go away completely. And those 5 profit centers, again, are when you're a direct investor, you benefit from appreciation, and it's leverage appreciation when you have a loan. The second one is the cash flow. That third profit center is the loan pay down, not made by you, which you're responsible for in your own primary residence, but that's loan pay down made by the tenant. Fourthly, the tax benefits. And that fifth one is the one that really most real estate investing educators almost don't even teach, or they tend to forget, and that's the inflation hedging benefit that David's bringing up, or you can really think of it as an inflation profiting benefit. Over time, if your principal and interest payment on your income property is, say, $450, well, that's going to go ahead and stay the same, and the purchasing power of that $450 is diluted over time such that its drag doesn't drag you down nearly as much, and that's why your cash flow annually can increase at a rate faster than inflation, and that's because your biggest expense as a single-family income property investor is fixed and does not rise with inflation at all, and that's locked in for 30 years.
Yeah, there's another part of that inflation hedge, which is the ability to repay your debt with devalued currency. And that seems kind of complicated, but it basically is if a dollar buys certain basket of goods today, and in some point in the future, that same dollar buys half that basket of goods, then when you borrow that money, you're borrowing the full basket. And when you repay that money in some point in the future, you're going to be repaying it with the same dollars, but you're going to be repaying it with half a basket of goods. Appreciation and inflation are not exactly the same thing, because appreciation could be that the neighborhood improves, that there's more people moving into an area, and so the demand for that product increases and the supply is constricted. That's what I think of about as appreciation. Versus inflation is when the price of everything rises. It's rare, but we could also have deflation, where the price of everything goes down. And so inflation and deflation kind of move in different speeds with the rate of appreciation or the rate of depreciation, because it could be that you buy into a neighborhood and suddenly it's less desirable, or some developer adds a whole bunch of supply in the neighborhood, or a major employer leaves and people are less interested in being in that particular area. So that inflation and appreciation are slightly different factors that influence an investor's return.
Inflation being that fifth profit center for a direct real estate investor, that's something that a lot of people don't talk about. I actually did a whiteboard video on just that topic. It was called Cash Flow versus Inflation, and you can watch that video at getricheducation.com/video. One advantage with single-family homes is that both seasoned investors and beginning investors can profit from single-family homes. In fact, I still own several, even though I'm a 15-year cash flowing real estate investor, which I can hardly believe. 15 years. I started young. But what makes it approachable is a single-family home. For one thing, it's lower cost than a typical apartment building. And then secondly, for those that are just looking to get in, is the financing is considerably easier to come by than it is for multifamily apartment buildings. And oftentimes for multifamily apartment buildings, you need to have some experience or show your lender a resume, and you don't need to do that with single-family homes.
Yeah, I call single-family homes the low-hanging fruit in the investor path. Many people start out acquiring single-family homes, sometimes just as a leave behind, meaning they bought a home to live in and then they had to relocate for some reason. And then instead of selling their home, they just keep that as a rental. Maybe they decide that that was a good financial return, or that they might return to that home in the future. But they become almost accidental landlords, and then they realize the benefit of real estate investment, and then they get the bug and start buying more and more. There's a lot of things to know about investing that are product type specific, that require specialty knowledge. And single family homes are oftentimes easiest to understand because people already own a single family home as a consumer. Very few people own a self-storage facility as a consumer and then say, maybe I should rent out some more self-storage units because I don't occupy them with all my own stuff. That doesn't happen. They know people who own single-family homes, right? You don't have to go very far to find somebody who owns a single-family home and ask them what their experience of owning that is. But for most Americans, they don't know very many experienced commercial real estate investors who own large apartment buildings or shopping centers, et cetera. And so it's a harder asset class. Commercial real estate is often a harder asset class to break into because of that knowledge base and because of the peer group, that there's fewer people in that space. And so it's harder to get a peer group around you to support you in the ownership of those asset classes.
That's a really good point. So with an income property as a single family home, oftentimes that's where the first person kind of experiences that ta-da, wow, mailbox money just showed up, $230 every month from my single-family turnkey property in Birmingham or Memphis or Indianapolis or wherever it is. So that's a bit of a magical moment for somebody. And oftentimes that's the first place that someone really experiences the impact of leverage. When you buy a $100,000 turnkey single-family home with a $20,000 down payment, over time your $100,000 property might appreciate up to $120K. And that's not just a 20% gain. That's when you start to realize, oh, I only put $20K into this, and now I have $20K additional creation through leverage. So now I've just doubled my $20K in a few years while I'm getting these payments every month. And you really begin to understand the power of real estate investing, leverage, and wealth creation through all five of those profit centers. But some of those are advantages that you can get with apartment buildings as well. There really are some advantages to single-family homes that you can't quite get with apartment buildings. For one thing, besides having more availability to financing, we had Graham Parham on the show a couple months ago, and he let us know that now you can get 20% Fannie Freddie financing on your first 10 single-family properties, whereas you couldn't previously. So that availability of financing is greater than it's been for a long time with single-family homes. Another thing that differentiates single-family homes from apartment buildings is in apartment buildings you have shared walls. Now, there are some pros and some cons to having shared walls and families all living under one roof. Some of the advantages of single-family homes where you don't have any shared walls is, well, some of those things that maybe people don't want to talk about so much, those big negative things that happen. For example, if you've got shared walls and you have a fire in an apartment building, that can be more of a catastrophe, a calamity, a risk to tenants, and a financial loss to you. There's some of those things like cockroaches or bed bugs or just noise. If you have one noisy, disruptive tenant or, God forbid, a drug-dealing tenant in your sixplex, well, that can affect and spread to the entire building. But with single-family homes, you don't have those risks.
And I think the financing that you were mentioning earlier is such a powerful component of investing that I really am not a fan of paying cash for single family homes, because the yield in single family homes really comes from the delta between the cap rate, which is the net operating income of the property annualized, divided by the value of the property. That gives you the cap rate. So it's the reflection of the property's ability to create income as a free and clear asset. So if you can get a property that's producing a 6% yield and you can buy that property with 5% interest rate financing, the question is, how much money do you want to borrow at 5% to invest at 6%?
You'd still want to borrow about as much as you practically could.
As much as you can, right? And those numbers get even more powerful in market cycles when you could say, even a few years ago, you could borrow money at 4.5% and buy a property that was paying you 6.5%. And now you're making a 2% spread on the bank's money. You want to borrow even more. That financing is an important part of creating high rates of return for the investor while also creating diversity. Because with only 20% down, you could control 5 properties for the same amount of cash out of pocket as paying cash for one property. Maybe it's slightly different with closing costs, et cetera, but you get the illustration that the leverage creates diversity. You can buy, 4 or 5 houses on the same street with financing rather than just one. Also, that financing, it allows you to create a stop loss, right? If you have 100% of your property free and clear and it declines 50% in value, well, you lost, 50% of your investment. But if you were to say buy 5 properties and you had 20% down in each, and one of those properties, for whatever reason, declined greater than 20%, you lost all the equity in that particular property, but the other properties might not have. They might have gone up in value, right? To offset your loss in one, you might have gains in the other. And that could be either because of maintenance issues on the property or just bad luck with a tenant or just market diversity, right? You can take that same money and go buy a property in 5 different markets rather than keeping all your equity in one property. The other thing that financing allows an investor to do is create a form of asset protection, because when you own a free and clear property, it's a very juicy morsel for an attorney to want to attack. It's a big piece of equity that, let's say, your tenant or some other creditor could hire an attorney and say, hey, I want to go sue this particular person. They do an asset search and very easily see that you own the property, and they can go on some source like Zillow and see what the property's worth, and they could go on public records and see that that property is free and clear. That attorney might say, let me go take that case on contingency because that person is probably very collectible. But if you have 80% leverage on that property, well, after the cost of the lawsuit and the cost of collections and foreclosing on that property and liquidating that property, that 20% equity is not very attractive for a creditor to try to attack. And so anyone who wants to attack you or your estate is not going to be very interested in properties with only 20% equity. So the more financing that you've got in the public record, it makes you less of a target.
That's right. And lawsuits are really quite uncommon. These slip and fall cases, I just really don't see them. But why expose yourself to that at all? If you don't have much equity in a property, if you don't have much low-hanging fruit for a plaintiff attorney to go after, the lawsuit likely won't even be born in the first place. And you don't want it to be born in the first place. Even if a lawsuit does come against you and you win, well, you had to go through a lot of inconvenience and stress. Well, just cut that off and don't put much equity in a property in the first place. If I have $100,000, I'm going to buy 5 single-family properties and put 20% down on each one of them. I wouldn't put $100,000 all cash and buy just one. Now I've hedged myself from an asset protection standpoint. I've also increased my leverage. And if I want to increase leverage at any time, which I do, well, I sure want to increase my leverage at this time when interest rates are still historically low. Also, that way, when I buy 5 properties, I have a chance to geographically diversify myself and be in 2 or 3 or 4 or even 5 different markets so that I'm not exposed to one local geography's economic fortunes or misfortunes. And, at the same time, what one's done when they purchase 5 properties rather than one is they do what I'll call is you've just increased your divisibility, okay? If you have 5 single-family homes rather than a 5-plex, well, just say you have 1 or 2 of those 5 properties that aren't performing very well over time. Well, you can go peel those off and sell just that one dog that's not performing very well and retain the other 4. So you have that divisibility, and you just wouldn't have the ability to do that with a 5-plex building. With a 5-plex, you either keep the whole thing or sell the whole thing.
That's a very good point. And on that vein of financing, some people mistakenly say, well, David, if I get more debt on the property, it significantly reduces my cash flow. And I'm buying this property for cash flow, so I don't want financing. I want to get that property free and clear. And I think it's an interesting misnomer, because back to that point of if you can borrow money at 5% and invest it at 6%, how much do you want to borrow? The answer is as much as possible. And that's a strategy that I teach at hasslefreecashflowinvesting.com, which is that cap rate must exceed the interest rate at minimum 1% and ideally 2% or greater. And the people who find that additional financing significantly erodes their cash flow is because they have that formula backwards, right? They're looking at borrowing that money at 5% and they invested it into a 3 cap property. Well, how much money do you want to borrow at 5 to invest at 3? The answer is none. You have a lot of people that are in very high cost, low cap rate markets like California or New York City or pretty much any popular major metro in the country with a few exceptions, where if the cost to rent is significantly cheaper than the cost to buy, then that's a clue that your cap rate is not very favorable. And so people in, let's say, I'll use San Francisco as an example, they are saying, well, David, I need to pay my property off because that's the only way that I'm going to get cash flow on this property. And I think, no, you just have the wrong market, because you're trying to double down on a 3 cap property with 5% debt. The debt isn't the problem. It's the cap rate is the problem. And the cap rate is probably accurate for your geography, but you might have to leave your geography and go invest where the numbers make sense.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of people do tend to get that wrong. Some people say, well, I'll put 40% down on this property rather than 20% because that way it provides better cash flow. Well, all you've done is you've had to go pay for cash flow. You've just bought and paid for that cash flow, and you shouldn't have to do that. You should look for those markets with a low down payment relative to another market. You can produce that cash flow. So it really all comes down to the cap rate in that market and submarket and that prevailing rent to value ratio in that prevailing market or prevailing submarket. You're listening to Get Rich Education. Our guest is Hassle-Free Cashflow Investing's David Campbell. More when we come back. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold.
Are you having a hard time finding great investment properties? Unfortunately, the best deals are rarely found locally. Successful investing begins with the right properties in the right markets. Norada Real Estate provides everything you need to invest in the best deals across the U.S. Our simple, proven system will help you create real wealth and passive monthly cash flow. Get your free copy of the ultimate guide to passive real estate investing at noradarealestate.com/guide. That's NORADA realestate.com/guide.
Are you looking to invest in your first investment property or grow your existing inventory? Highlands Residential Mortgage can help, offering down payments as low as 15% and credit score requirements down to 620. Their streamlined process is designed to help investors close their loans quickly and without any surprises. You need someone who knows cash flowing real estate and can help guide you through the muddy waters of today's lending environment. So call Graham Parham today, toll free at 855-326-6802. The Parham team can help you purchase or refinance any of your 1 to 4 family investment properties.
NMLS number 195724, 12001 North Central Expressway, Suite 750, Dallas, Texas 75243. Equal housing lender, not licensed in all states.
This is Get Rich Education's business developer, John Collins, and you're listening to Get Rich Education with my friend Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education with our guest, David Campbell. David, you have a common mistake to avoid, especially for single-family income property investors.
Yeah, I talk with a lot of investors on a daily basis, and sometimes an investor says that they're taking their rental cash flow from the property and the income that they make from work, and they're using that extra income to make extra payments on their debt, to make extra payments on that mortgage. And I think that's a huge mistake. And the reason it's a huge mistake is when you pay that loan down, it increases the equity in the property. And the more equity you have invested in that property, it potentially lowers your rate of return, because when you ultimately get your profit, you're going to divide that profit by the amount invested. And as you're reinvesting into that property with your own money, then your rate of return goes down. The other thing that I really dislike about that formula of making additional principal payments on your mortgage, it's shortening the length of your loan, but it isn't improving your monthly cash flow, right? I would much rather see an investor take their extra income and invest into something like first lien mortgage note that would actually produce monthly cash flow for them, rather than putting that money into debt reduction, which doesn't do a thing for monthly cash flow. Their mortgage stays the same. And then as they're reducing their debt, if they ever wanted that money back, there's a huge cost, a huge transaction cost to activate your equity in a single family home, either through sale, which is very expensive, or refinance, which you have to pay the lender for the privilege to get your own money out of your property. And the other thing it does is it shortens your amortization period and it increases your profitability, but it only increases your profitability by the amount of the interest rate on your loan. So if you've got a 30-year fixed loan at 4.5%, and you're paying that loan down, you're paying it down with equity, which is at-risk equity, and your benefit is only 4.5%. And you can get significantly better returns than 4.5% at other places in the marketplace, and with lower risk. Meaning, if I paid my mortgage down and my lender is giving me 4.5%, my pay down is at-risk junior equity. Versus I could take that same money and go buy a hard money loan first position lien and get 9-10%. So my yield is double and my risk is significantly lower when I'm a senior lender, rather than pumping more equity into a junior at-risk position in the same property through accelerated amortization.
Yeah, they're great points. And boy, I've talked about this at length, of the penalty and the downside of making prepayments toward any mortgage. I mean, there are just dozens of reasons for why not to do that, led by loss of leverage and led by, you said it, loss of cash flow. One advantage with single-family income properties over apartments is that typically, as the property owner, you have little or no utility payments. You know, in a single-family home, the tenant pays the heat typically. The tenant pays for the electric. The tenant pays for the lawn care. They pay for the water. They pay for the wastewater. They pay for the trash. And as an apartment building owner, when you're trying to manage income and expenses, most of those costs, or in some cases all of those costs, are on you as the owner.
That's true. And so that's a nice way to manage your risk into a deal, is by shifting your maintenance costs as much as possible to your tenant, right? So in a single family home, what's interesting is that the income level of your tenant goes down. They're less able to absorb some of those risks. And so if there's a spike in utility costs or in a maintenance cost that would typically be borne by a tenant, lower income tenants are less able to absorb that risk. I've owned some, C-class properties where the tenant literally couldn't afford to buy cleaning supplies and a vacuum. And so, you look at the home and it's in squalor, and who would live like that? Like, well, that person can't afford to buy a vacuum, which seems incomprehensible. And so I generally gravitate, when I'm investing in single family homes, to more B-class, closer to ideally just below median income and median home price. So not the bottom, but B minus is where I find the nice nexus between cash flow and low hassle and return. And a general rule of thumb is the more hassle an investment gives you, the more problems that investment is, the higher the rate of return should be to the investor to compensate you for that yield. And so when you're looking for investments for single family homes, you could say, hey, let me go buy the absolute nicest home in the absolute nicest neighborhood and the absolute best schools. And this is the best. Everyone would want to live here. Well, chances are if everyone wants to live there, then the price of that property has been bid up significantly by the owner-occupied market, greater than the rental market. And so now the cost to own is greater than the cost to rent. And that's not a good formula for investors. Investor, we want the formula. It's got to be cheaper to own than rent, because that's the whole point. When you're an investor, you're going to buy something that's cheap to own, and you're going to rent it out for more money than it costs you to own it. And so to find those places and product types where it's cheaper to own than rent, you're usually ending up in things and neighborhoods that are slightly less desirable. And so as an investor, you kind of have to pick your intersection of ugly and find out, like, how ugly can I accept and still get a good yield that I want and, sleep at night, that it's low hassle, right? Because I definitely don't want to own in the hood. I don't want to own in the ghetto, and there's just so much hassle and risk that goes with that. But that's my personal investment philosophy. There's all kinds of people that love buying in terrible neighborhoods and buying junky, C-class properties because the yield is higher there because there's fewer buyers, right? And it's just supply and demand economics, where if there are fewer buyers, then the prices are depressed, right? The prices go down. And that could be a very good thing for you as a buyer. But you also got to think about the exit is when you sell the property. If it's a junky neighborhood and a junky property, then there's going to be fewer buyers when you go to sell also. So what you're really buying is the income for the duration that you're holding. Single family homes have a lot of huge benefits, and the monthly cash flow, I don't think, is one of the strongest, right? So I definitely want my properties to be cash flow positive, but that's not usually why I buy single family homes, right? The other benefits that we talked about at the beginning of the podcast are usually more compelling to me. You get the tenant to amortize that debt for you. I mean, everybody tells the story of, hey, I bought this home for $100,000 and then a decade later I sold it for $200,000. You hear that story over and over and over again. But that same investor usually doesn't say, yeah, well, I bought that home and for $100,000 and then put $50 a month in my pocket for 10 years. Yeah, that's interesting. But when you look at like the hassle and the illiquidity and all the downsides associated with real estate ownership, that $50 a month might not really be enough to compensate you for the opportunity costs of what else you could be doing with that money. So you have to look at the full suite of benefits associated with single family home ownership, not just the monthly cash flow. But the cash flow is hugely important. I like to say, how many properties can you own that are positive cash flow $1 a month? And the answer is, well, an infinite number, right? You can own hundreds of thousands of properties that are positive $1 a month cash flow. But how many properties can you own that are negative cash flow $1 a month? Maybe a lot of them, but at some point there's going to be a limit. There's going to be a limit based on how much of your personal income can you use to subsidize your negative cash flow. So cash flow is hugely important, and it's got to be positive, but it isn't everything. Look for those markets that you can invest in that are going to create cash flow. Look for those markets that are going to create positive arbitrage, meaning that your cap rate is at least 1%, ideally 2% or more, greater than the interest rate. And look for those markets where the puck is going, where you say, what are the natural drivers that are going to cause people to want to live here, based on job creation, looking at the government, either local or state or federal government. What are they doing to support population and job growth in a particular area? One of my favorite markets is investing in states that are income tax free. So if a state like Texas or Florida or even Alaska or Nevada, where there's no state income tax, generally there's a double benefit in that it's drawing jobs and drawing people to those states, and you want to invest where people are moving to. You don't want to invest where people are leaving, because that's going to be investing against the tide. And then also, as an investor, like Keith here in Alaska, and let's say you bought an asset in Texas. Alaska has no state income tax, and Texas has no state income tax. So now you created a very efficient investment. And I see some people get that mixed up. Maybe they live in a very efficient income tax state like Alaska, and then they go buy an asset in California, which has a very aggressive income tax structure.
Right.
And now you wind up creating a state tax due where you didn't have to.
Yeah, that's a great point. And fortunately, a lot of the best states to invest in on a cap rate and a cash flow basis are those low or no income tax states, like you mentioned. I think there's really fairly psychological component to this, both for how you think as the investor and also you as the investor. I want you to think about how your tenant is thinking. Some mistakes to avoid that beginning investors make is they only want to buy property that they would want to live in themselves. And I'm telling you, that is a mistake, a mistake, a mistake. So you kind of want to find that sweet spot. David mentioned B class or maybe B minus class, where you do have just a little bit of a pride of ownership in their neighborhood, but it's not such a great neighborhood. There's so much desire to live there that that's run prices up that rents couldn't keep up to proportionally. And so you kind of want to find that tenant that might treat a home like it's their own. If you can find that class of tenant that treats a home well because it feels like their own, you could certainly be a lot better off. Now, let's look at what happens if someone goes to the C end or the D end and a tenant damages a common area in an apartment, in a laundry room. Say, well, you don't even know who's responsible for that damage in an apartment building, where if a single family home's damaged, well, it's pretty clear who's responsible. And then additionally, you want to stay above that if you can into that sweeter spot. And when a tenant lives in a home where it feels like their own and they do have some sense of responsibility, they're going to treat it better. And you know what? That might even help you on the exit, because on an exit strategy, when you're ready to sell your single family home down the road, not only do you have a greater pool of buyers externally that might want to come in and buy your single family home, including occupants, but you might have the tenant that lives inside the home that might want to be your buyer.
That's so true. Your exit for an apartment building is always an investor or buyer. Your exit for a single family home could be another investor, but probably the most profitable sale is going to be to an owner occupant on the exit sale of that property. A great way to get into find markets and properties to buy is to work with a turnkey provider. I know there's a great resource at greturnkey.com, which is a resource that Keith has assembled. And I think Keith has done a fantastic job in assembling a team of turnkey providers. And I don't have a horse in this race. I am not a turnkey real estate provider. I have done a whole heap of investment real estate, and I recognize a good thing when I see it. I also like working with property managers as a source of inventory. So if you can ask a property manager, once you find a really good market, maybe jerryturnkey.com could help you find a great market and a great market provider. Once you've found a single family home, you probably don't want to manage it yourself. Even if it's local to you, you probably want to work through a professional in helping you get that property managed. You could ask a real estate broker, hey, what do you think this property is going to rent for? But if they have a bias in selling you that property, then very likely that they have a bias to make those income high and those expenses appear low. But when you talk with a property manager who's going to have a recurring relationship with you, their bias is to earn your business every single month rather than the broker who gets their fee and they're done. The manager is going to give you a much more realistic expectation for what rent you're going to get and what expenses you might see with that property. The other great thing about a property manager, I like to ask them the question, what do you want to manage? And that's such a powerful question that very few people ask. Because you could go into a marketplace and you buy something and then you take it to a manager and say, hey, aren't you proud of this new thing that I bought? Well, it's too late. It's like saying, what do you think of my new wife? Well, did you already marry her? Okay, well, it doesn't matter what I think. It's done. So when you get the property, manager involved very early in the process, right? Before you close escrow on your deal, ideally even before you're writing a purchase contract, you've got a property manager on your team. So you can say, hey, manager, I'm thinking about buying this. What do you think? And if it's something that's consistent with what they want to manage, then they'll encourage you to buy it because they want to manage it. And the property managers know those properties that are the easiest to manage, they have the highest demand in the local marketplace with the least amount of effort. And so if you and your property manager have the same goal in mind, which is to get income with the least amount of effort, then that's good, right? If you bring them a very difficult to manage property, then your interests are not aligned. they're going to have a hard time producing income, and you might be frustrated with the manager when in fact the problem was you just bought the wrong thing.
That is pure gold right there. When you as a buyer, before you buy a property, when you're talking to a manager, if you ask the manager that question, hey, Mr. Manager, what can I put inside your portfolio to make you profitable? That is the right question. And that also shows the manager that you have an interest in them and that you're not just all in it for yourself. David brings up management, and when management meets turnkey, that makes your life so much better as an investor. That increases your return on time invested. Think about if you owned 14 single-family income properties in 3 or 4 different geographic markets, and you were managing all those yourself. I don't recommend that. I think that's a hectic, crazy way to live. So when you have turnkey property management in each one of those markets, you've really reduced a lot of your administrative overburden, because otherwise, with an apartment building, you could get management efficiencies because they'd all be under one roof. Well, you don't have that problem when you have a built-in manager and you have someone handling that for you, turnkey, in these different markets. And with single-family homes, another thing that you've done is you've reduced your turnover. There's typically less turnover in a single-family home, and as an investor, turnover and vacancy is your biggest expense. And again, when a tenant feels like it's their own in a single-family home, they're more likely to stay longer, and that's why residency durations are longer in single-family homes than they are in apartment buildings. Single-family homes often tend to have a better location. They tend to be in better school districts, just generally, than apartment buildings. And see, that's another contributor to that long-term retention. You do have those higher quality tenants that want to stay in that better school district. And you also typically tend to have better safety in those neighborhoods, and therefore the better appreciation like we talked to before. So that really comes down to, with your life cycle of ownership of this single-family income property, in what your exit strategy is.
Yeah, and it's important. Sometimes people say, which is better, David? Should I buy investment A or investment B? Which is better? And the question is, there's no such thing as a good investment or a bad investment. There's only investments that are suitable for the investor and suitable for that investor's timing and experience and what they want that investment to do for them. When you play the game of Monopoly, for example, you start out collecting green houses. And at some point in the game, you exchange, and that's a very powerful thing. You exchange those green houses for a red hotel. You've got to turn those houses in to consolidate your asset into a red hotel. You don't start out with red hotels because it probably isn't suitable for most investors to start out investing in hotels. When you are looking at single-family homes, for me in my investing career, I've done hundreds of millions of dollars of real estate investing. I do not want to own another single-family home rental. It's just not suitable for me. Like, the dollar size is just a distraction in my portfolio. Like, I have a minimum dollar size that I want to invest in a particular asset type. So single-family home is exactly where I started. I mean, my first rental property was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath condo where I lived in 1 bedroom and I rented out the other bedroom. And that was my very first real estate investment. And I've grown to the place where now apartments and shopping centers and medical office are significantly more suitable for me because of consolidation. Single-family homes, I love them, and I think they're the most suitable asset type for most people to start, but it usually isn't the end game. It's not where people are going to end up, because there's definitely economies of scale that an investor has to consider. And when you're collecting homes, depending on the marketplace you're in, your homes are probably going to be $60,000 to maybe $250,000. And once you start getting over about $250,000 in purchase price, the rent to purchase price ratio breaks down. You can't go buy $1 million single family home and rent it and create positive cash flow and positive arbitrage. I've never seen that, not once.
Right. I haven't either.
Yeah. And so now if you're going to create a $10 million real estate portfolio, it's not going to be 10 $1 million homes. And you might get some vacation rental weirdity. So there might be like one person who can think of one example or where I'm wrong. But just as a general rule, you're not going to get 10 $1 million homes to cash flow. You're going to wind up having 100 homes of $100,000 each to get your $10 million portfolio. And now you've got financing challenges because you can't really finance 100 homes with the same kind of cheap long-term fixed rate Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac subsidized financing that you can buy. Say if you're buying one, well, there's great financing available. To buy 100 houses, the financing is not so good. So at some point, you do make that organic transfer because of economy of scale and because of financing. and just because of suitability of what you want your portfolio to do for you, and because of market cycle. In 2009 and 10, I was trying to buy one home every single month, minimum. That was my goal. Minimum one single family home per month. A, because it was good for where I was in my investing cycle. And B, it was the time to buy houses for sure. And then the market cycle shifted and it made more sense. And my personal investment shifted where I wanted to become more passive. I started selling those single family homes, harvesting the equity, and because the market had appreciated significantly since 2009, and reinvesting those proceeds into mortgage paper because the income yield was superior, the cash flow was superior, the risk was superior, and the ease of management was superior. But the interesting thing is, to get into single family homes, you don't need a whole lot of money. To get into private lending, you need a whole lot of money. Private lending is usually one-to-one. There is not a whole lot of leverage available in the private lending marketplace. You've got to invest cash to get a yield. When you're investing in single family homes, you can get someone to loan you 90%, 80%, 75% of the purchase price, depending on what it is. A great way for many people to start out in the single family home investing category is through FHA owner occupied financing through a trail of leave behind rentals. For those people who are starting out with pretty meager means, maybe you go get an FHA loan with 3.5% down and the seller pays the closing costs, and you go buy that home and you really do live in it because you don't want to commit lender fraud and don't tell a lender you're going to live in a property that you're not. It's just a really bad way to start your investing career. So you go buy that owner occupied property, and if you're young and single and you can take on roommates, go for it, right? My first rental was a 2-bedroom, 2-bath condo, and I lived in one bedroom and rented out the other. And then my second investment was a 5-bedroom home, and I lived in one bedroom and I rented out 4 bedrooms. And so, there is a way to create a portfolio of highly leveraged finance properties through, hey, you buy a property, live in it, maybe you rent out some bedrooms. Then after a reasonable amount of seasoning, 6 months, a year, maybe 2 years, maybe you move out. You go buy another one, even in the same town. Go buy another owner-occupied primary residence, and then you rent out the home that you left behind. And then maybe your goal is every year you move, or maybe every 2 years you move to a new primary residence, and you just keep the one that you left behind as a rental. Sometimes, it depends on the resources you're starting out with. I mean, if you've got $20 million to place, you're probably not ever going to buy a single family home rental. If you've got $20,000 to invest, you're probably not going to start out in shopping centers or apartments or hard money lending. You're probably going to start out buying a single family home either as a rental or a hybrid, like an owner occupied rental, or you put a down payment and rent out rooms in your own home.
Yeah, well, with the whole FHA 3.5% down, owner-occupied, leaving the trail behind strategy, which, as my listeners know, that's how I began back in 2002 by putting 3.5% down FHA on an owner-occupied fourplex where I lived in one unit, rented out the other 3, and then vacated it. As soon as I vacated and leave it behind, now I've got 4 rent incomes rather than 3. And you kind of leave this trail of properties behind, but the key thing is you don't leave the owner-occupied financing behind. Even with the property, you still have that terrific preferable owner-occupied financing in place. And then, just to kind of wrap it up, David, with turnkey single-family homes, I think people find that as the most approachable. And for most people, that's where the leverage magic begins. That's where the cash flow mailbox money begins. And that's where you've really planted that wealth-building seed in that income property. So, David, how could our listeners find out more about you and connect with you? Tell us about what you do over there.
Keith, I'm primarily an investor for my own account, and I do like helping other people invest and come up with strategies for investing and helping them implement wealth-creating strategy. The strategies that I use really adapt based on market cycle and what I think is a dominant vehicle for most people in a particular market cycle. The solution changes depending on what the market is. But I've written a fantastic report that I think is very consistent with this conversation that we've been having. And it's called Secrets of Hassle-Free Cash Flow Investing. And in that report, you can get it at www.hasslefreecashflowinvesting.com. And at hasslefreecashflowinvesting.com, you can download that free ebook. There's going to be a banner on the side that you can download it or click on the ebooks tab and find the Hassle-Free Cash Flow Investing report. And it talks a lot about how to be a successful single-family home investor. I think that's a great on-ramp for people who want to learn more about me and how I got started in real estate with pretty small means and then became financially independent through the vehicle of real estate. I've got an inspirational story, but I like telling it because I like saying, man, if I could do it, you can do it. Because once you're financially independent, the doors open for everything that you want in life. Because if you have freedom of time, you can do anything that you want to do. The more you have, the more you can give away. The more of your time, the more of your resources. You can be there for your family. You can take better control of your health. You can follow your dreams. It's a worthy goal. Find your compelling why. Find out the thing that is so important to you that you're willing to continue growing. And keep listening to the Get Rich Education podcast, because Keith brings such a wealth of information and it's available for free. I mean, there's people that sell all kinds of very high cost investor education programs, and some of them are good and some of them aren't. But Keith's program is awesome and it's coming to you for free. And I also know that Keith wrote a book, and I'm a big fan of Keith's book, and I believe it's an Amazon #1 bestseller. And so anyone who's listening to this, definitely check out Keith's book. And I'm sure in the show notes, you'll find a way to access Keith's book about real estate investing, where he talks about the 5 profit centers in investing in real estate and some other really awesome tips that you can't miss. And I think it's a very low cost on-ramp to really accelerating your investor education by checking out Keith's book, and definitely stay plugged into his podcast. I appreciate you opening up the platform for me to introduce, hassle-free-cashflow-investing.com and the resources that are there. But I also really want to applaud Keith in the huge resources that he's created on his website at getricheducation.com.
The interesting thing, David, is that people, including my listeners, they hear me every week and they think, well, Keith just knows it all. Well, a lot of times I do know the answer to that question that you have as a listener, but not every time. There's just too much to know. And I've got to tell you, I am no better than my advisors sometimes. And when I don't know an answer to a question, I've got to say the best, most well-versed, all-around person with real estate investing and on all its different aspects and facets is David Campbell. So, David, you're probably the person, when I need to refer a question, I refer to you more often than anybody. David Campbell, thanks so much for coming back onto the show.
It is such a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, David is such a wealth of information. You can find his resources in the show notes. Yes, the book, 7 Money Myths That Are Killing Your Wealth Potential, my first book. Not only do I spend a fair bit of time in that book on why getting your money to work for you just isn't going to do it, and it's not going to make you wealthy, which is a real wake-up call and a total epiphany to some people. I also debunk that myth that people think that they want to be millionaires, okay? But millionaires aren't even financially wealthy anymore. Don't be a millionaire. Be wealthy instead. I really get into that. The book is, I think, very unintimidating, definitely not over your head. And I think it answers the why invest in real estate question better than any book I've ever read, if I do say so myself. I think that you'll find the first chapter in the book rather motivating and inspiring about why and how you can do more in your life, and why most people instead, they choose to live a small life where with just a subtle mindset shift, you can live better and give better than you ever thought you could. Why hope for a pile of cash at the end of your life when you can instead ensure streams of income all your life and have a bigger pile at the end at the same time? You can do what most people do, which is work hard once and get paid once, or instead do the smart work once and get paid the rest of your life. I get into that in the book as well. I've been doing this show every week since, 2014, and I don't know that I've ever asked you to buy anything at all, but I would really love it if you bought this low-cost book and shared it with at least one friend or relative. And it's not because I make much profit from the book sales, because I don't. It's a vehicle that can make an impact. That's it. GetRichEducation.com/book. I'm going to be back next week to make a great effort to help you build your wealth. Now go out there and don't quit your daydream.
You've been listening to Get Rich Education, telling you what the wealthy won't tell you about real estate and investing.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
Cash flow real estate investors nationwide and worldwide, this is Get Rich Education's Keith Weinhold. Forbes has rated Memphis, Tennessee as the #1 cash flowing market in the world. Our good friends at Mid-South Homebuyers have been Memphis's premier turnkey real estate provider for 14 years with a stellar reputation and an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. Owner Terry Kerr was born and raised in Memphis. Yeah, he knows the market and has renovated and sold over 1,000 houses in the Memphis area. Find out what their many repeat buyers already know. Their houses are completely renovated, even come with a 1-year builder's warranty and a lifelong rental guarantee. They're a perfect fit for the first-time out-of-state investor or the seasoned investor diversifying their portfolio. Mid-South Homebuyers' friendly staff makes investing easy. Learn more at midsouthhomebuyers.com or give them a call at 901-217-HOME. The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.